Greetings and welcome to another Lessons with Odin. This episode is going to be the sequel to my thread guides where I go over the fishing line type of beading threads that are on the market, not just in the beading world, but outside, because, as we all know, things that are marketed to specialist crafters, they assume we all have a lot of money, so they upscale, and the pricing and charges for this is a lot more ridiculous than it needs to be. So, if you want to go to find my nylon thread review, I'll leave a link in the description box or a card right here, so you can check that out first. Before we get into that, I wanted to update you on my opinion. So this is kind of like a review within a review, but opinion on these tulip beading needles. If you recall, or if you hear me bitching about these on the Facebook group that we have, I was really hesitant to buy these because of the price, and it just seems ridiculous to me to spend $10 to $15 for two needles. But I am both sad and glad to say that it is actually pretty worth it. These are pretty flexy when it comes to beading, so they don't really have too much resistance, so you can kind of bend, and it forgives a lot. Like, you can see, this one has a slight bend to it, and that is nothing compared to what it do to, like, these John James needles, or those pony needles that are in the little gum wrapper packet things. But, yeah, sad to say that, yes, these tulip beading needles are kind of worth it. However, your mileage may vary because I have heard complaints that some of them do break. So, this is a good thing that there's two in them. So, yeah. Take that for what you will. So, my opinions are going to be structured in a way where I compare everything to Fireline, because Fireline is basically the industry standard. Everybody knows it. Everybody uses it, for the most part. My baby girl is tearing up my carpet. I'm also not going to go over every single beading thread out there, because that's ridiculous and expensive. And if I could just find some things that are accessible, what people have been talking about recently, that's what I did. So, I'll start with Fireline. I have had good results with Fireline. It's rigid, it's very nice and structured, it's a braided thread, and it doesn't really misbehave that much. At least I don't have problems with when I use it. It's kind of like a plasticky feel, and you need really sharp scissors in order to cut this. Otherwise, you're not going to have a good time, and you're going to have some lovely splintered ends that are really hard to thread. You don't need to wax this. It's pretty much stiff and rigid. It comes in a variety of sizes available on the market. It comes in smoke and crystal. Smoke leaves a residue all over the place. It's kind of gross, so if you want to, like, rub it down with, like, a tissue or something. I've heard the hack for using a dryer sheet on it, but I don't want to touch dryer sheets because of all the research and rumors about reproductive issues of dryer sheets. I'm not going to get into detail with that. Google it yourself. So, Fireline's pretty good. The major downside to Fireline is it is so freaking expensive. Like, this 125 yard spool was like $15 to $18, depending on where I get it. Fire Mountain occasionally has deals on this, so it's pretty good if you can catch them. They don't really have an email list as far as I know. Or if they did, it was really obnoxious and sending me like 3 emails a day, which is why I stopped subscribing to them. Anyway, moving on. This is what I'm comparing everything else to. So next up, the most popular competition is Wildfire. I do like it, to a point. This is very rigid in structure. It's almost like a plastic-coated fiber on the inside. It's very tough, and it doesn't feel like any sort of fiber at all. It's very rigid. The downside I find to this is if I'm threading it on a needle, sometimes the coating will shred off, especially if, like, when you thread the needle, you have that tail end and shortened end. And I like to work with longer threads because I'm lazy. So if I will have a really huge tail and then choke up when I progress the piece, the problem I have with that is when I try to do that, the eye of the needle will shred the coating off and kind of leaving the rest of the tail useless. Where if I have a really long tail, that's a lot of thread wasted. Another downside to this is it is very big. Like it comes in only one diameter, and as far as I know, there is no other single kind, nothing smaller at all on this, which is kind of a shame, but the way it's manufactured, I kind of see why. And I believe it also comes in white. Don't quote me on that because I didn't look it up. But it's huge, and you really cannot pass very many times with this thing, and good luck using it with 15s or smaller needles. I like to use this with larger ropes and things that don't require that many passes, or if it's just a stitch like the right angle weave or the herringbone where I don't want to pass back through just because I don't freaking feel like spending more time on it. So the Wildfire will have enough structure and rigidity to keep your piece intact. I'm also looking on the Beadalon's website, and there are a lot of options for this in a couple of diameters. I just haven't found it too accessible, because usually on bead websites and other places where you're buying other beads and in craft stores, you really only find it in one diameter, so I'm kind of iffy on the accessibility of it. It comes in a few colors as well, but I'm also noticing that the price is about the same as Fireline, which isn't a great deal. But you can find it in a big box craft store, and if you're really lucky and get the 60% off coupons, that's pretty worth it. So like the 50-yard spool like that cost me around $10, I think normal price, but if you get like a half off coupon, it's $5, so that's not bad at all. Again, your mileage may vary. Then one newer thread I kind of wanted to talk about. I found this on a UK site called Spoilt Rotten Beads, and they introduced this thing called Dura Thread. I ordered a sample of it, and I wanted to mention it because it is starting to come in to America. It claims near zero stretch, super abrasion resistance, great for working with sharp-edged beads, such as delicates and crystals, quad-core, 4-strand, braid technology, soft and flexible, 0.08 millimeter in diameter, fits size 10 and 12 beading needles, and 6-pound break strength. 100-meter spools start at just £8.95, more than half the price of other threads on the market, i.e. Fireline, but they can't say Fireline because they will get sued. So, this thread, I ordered a sample, 5 meters of it, and I've done some pieces with it, and I really enjoy it. Let's take a look, a little bit of this. It's flexible, and yet you can kind of feel, just by touching it, how thick and heavy-duty this is. Like, I do not feel... Like, it's got the pliability of a thickened nylon, like it has a shit ton of wax in it. But it's very, very durable, so if you can probably still, if you like the fabric-y feel of, like, wide cuffs, like this, for example, you can pretty much achieve that with this kind of thread as well. It just feels really tough, and I had a great time working with it, apart from one issue. The threads at the end do have a tendency to unravel, which can lead to some problems if you are re-threading a needle. So if this starts to, like, it starts to kind of unbraid and act a bit like horsetail, kind of, where there's a bunch of threads, or like DMC floss, where everything is just kind of like, it turns into basically hair at the end. So obviously rethreading that is quite difficult, but if you have any of your thread heaven or just regular beeswax or some chapstick left over, that can pretty much take care of that and give you a better time with it, but that's just something to keep in mind. I was pretty pleased when I saw this starting to trickle in on American markets. However, someone on our Facebook group had pointed me to an Amazon item called Hercules Extremely Strong and Tested PE Braided Line. And I was like, you know what? That looks really familiar. So I ordered it, and it is pretty much the same exact thing. This one is a little thinner and a little shinier, but it's the 4-braided. It feels exactly, the 4-strand braided. It feels exactly the same. Super abrasion resistance and casting, because you cast with your beads. Anyway, yeah. So I found this on Amazon for about $6 for a 100-meter spool, which completely blows the other two out of the market. It comes in also like 300, I believe 500, and 1,000 meter too, if you really just don't feel like buying thread anymore. It also comes in a reasonable range of colors. It has the black and white. You can even get gray. There's a couple of greens in there. There's a bright blue, a bright red, and just a lot of things that you can play with. So, I will leave links down below to the thread, so you can kind of see for yourself, because I bought the cheapest, and it was the 100 meter, so just to see what it was. It's a little more soft than the Dura Thread, and a little thicker, but nothing really nothing mind-blowing. Like, it really just, yeah, you can't tell the difference between the two. That is my conclusion there. I will probably be buying this most often, because it's really cheap, and I just hate constantly buying thread, especially when I use it constantly with all my crap. I have one honorable mention because it is still both a fishing line and a beading thread. This is also known as monofilament in the fishing world, but again, the bead industry has taken a liking to it. So monofilament or illusion cord is what you'll find it in the beading world. Monofilament fishing line is what you'll find it in the hardware store. They are the exact same thing. They are basically clear plastic tubing that is pretty much invisible, but it's one strand. It's basically a long piece of plastic that's been extruded into very, very thin tendrils, like fiber optic, and this is another beading thread that we use. I use it for structured and rigid pieces like my 3D right angle weave pieces, where I'm using nothing but crystals and I don't want the thread showing, and I want a rigid thing to stand up on its own without having to use a bail or another object. Like that, for example. I found this one online. But yeah, like that, where they're nice and rigid. And I've got my thread in there. You can't see the thread in there, but it's still, like, not floppy or hanging around. So if I hang it up, it's going to stay like that. So, I like it for that. I use it for basically 2-needle purposes, or 2-needle techniques. You cannot put this on a needle at all. It is way too rigid and too thick. You can find thinner diameters, but the best luck I've had is threading it through one of those big eye needles. But you can't use a long tail with this either, because if you thread it on to the big eye needles, it'll eventually shred and wear down and sever the cord as you're using it, because the two metal tines will rub and rub and rub until it's so weak that you can't use it. So that's the only success I've had with threading those on, which I know if, for the vision impaired, this stuff is really rough to work with. I've had students who are like, nah, I don't want to touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. And I completely understand that. But I thought I'd add it there because it's still technically a fishing line, it's still technically a beading thread, but it's really good for those tattoo necklaces and bracelets from the 90s. That's generally what some of these are made from. Some of them. Because there's other colors in this, but yes. That is my 2 cents in all this. So, too long, didn't read version. Fireline. Nice. Works well. Stable. Expensive as fuck. Wildfire. Not comparably cheaper. Very rigid, very nice to work with, but too thick to do everything with it. Dura Thread / Hercules fishing line. Probably the best of both worlds, and where the most happy mediums will be. The most functional, I think. And monofilament for very, very exclusive pieces. No, you cannot thread it with a needle. So, that is my opinions. Your mileage may vary. Unfortunately, with beading threads, I really, really wish it would just be like a one magical thread to rule them all. But because I do so much and so different purposes of things, that isn't possible. Like, I'm still going to be using my Nymo, or actually my 1G. I'm switching to 1G instead of Nymo because you can't bead embroider with all of this. Like, you can't, well, since this one is so flexible, you probably could do it with a thinner diameter and a thinner pound test weight, but I don't like to use bead embroidery with Fireline just because it's too stiff and it just it kind of doesn't make the piece as flexible as I need it. So I prefer not to use Firelines or these kind of lines with bead embroidery. But do what you want. I'm just telling you what I do. And yeah. So, have you had experience with any or all of these threads? Let me know what your opinions are in the comments down below. And I think that will do it from me. Be sure to like up this video and subscribe if you want to see more bullshit from me. Follow me around the interwebs and check out all of my other projects and stuff. All pertinent links will be down below. And thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for supporting me this far. Your help really helps me out exist and create things and give you more inspiration as well. And if you would like to be a patron as well and be like, hey Odin, you're doing cool shit and you get exclusive beading tutorials every month, check out the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank y'all so much for joining me, and of course, if there's anything I need to be trying out right now, feel free to let me know down below. I will see you next time.